Behind us or in front of us?
It's in front of us, just for a little while.
All right. Okay.
So we are now live on YouTube and also Facebook. Assalamu alaikum to all our viewers. Nice to see you here once again. Don't worry, you'll see us very soon if you can't see us just now. And as usual, what we're going to be doing, inshallah, is we're going to be waiting for a few minutes just for our students to come along and our parents. And then, inshallah, we will get started. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please do start typing them up and we will be taking them. Oh, very first question comes from Ustadh Maryam Sadak, and which is a Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah, we're hopefully going to get a question from Ustadh Maryam soon, or more than a question, some suggestions from the experience that Ustadh Maryam has had over some time. Assalamu alaikum, Bushra as well. Nice to have you back. So we do plan to have a shorter session now, but inshallah what we will do is we will be back next week again, inshallah.
Sheikh, I've been enjoying your Zoom tricks.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, yes, absolutely. It's all part of the adab of Zoomiyah, as we've mentioned. So it's great to be back on Zoom, alhamdulillah. Cool, okay, so inshallah, I think we've waited for 2 minutes. And I think we can start with the session, Sheikh.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So this week I wanted to discuss with Hamid actually and all the listeners regarding my own experience regarding sort of COVID-19, the pandemic, how it's affected me, and it's made me reflect a little bit on how it might be affecting the students with SEN. Potentially the students in the Madrasah as well. So from a personal perspective, I think I've been in lockdown maybe a week or two before the lockdown was officially announced because I had some symptoms of COVID-19, starting with sort of the usual, the fever, the headache, fatigue, severe chest pains. Lasted a good 2 weeks or so, and then obviously the lockdown was announced. And then, as people may or may not know, I'm a speech and language therapist working for the NHS. So in my own experience, our offices were then closed. And because schools were closed, and I go into schools quite often, we were given instructions to work from home in the interim before we hear about any possible changes that we might have to go through. So when the lockdown was announced, I was working from home. And what this meant was producing goods and materials for schools, doing reports, having sort of online meetings for a short period of time. And in the background, management within the NHS were talking about redeploying all NHS staff into the wards, into sort of the front line, if you like. So, and obviously there was some anxiety regarding this, not only from myself, but also from some of my colleagues as well. And then I got the dreaded phone call, should we say, that, I will be going into the front line, I will be going and working in the wards. I think April, that's middle of April or so. So,
can I ask you a question as you're explaining this, Sheikh? How do you feel about all these war terminologies that are being used in this whole scenario of the coronavirus? So how does that make you feel? That you're now joining the front line?
Yeah, the metaphorical front line. It's interesting because before I actually joined this front line, I'm very good friends with an AE doctor, and he was like, well, what does this frontline mean exactly? It's just doing something that we always do on a day-to-day basis. That's seeing patients face to face, dealing with them as you would as a normal human being. And it's really interesting actually because on my first day, they just admitted their patients in for the first time. So they got 2-3 patients that they had admitted in. These are brand new wards that the Nelft NHS Trust had opened up. And they heard that there were COVID patients. So bearing in mind these redeployed staff, they immediately started panicking, saying, oh my God, COVID patients, And then they see this old lady being wheeled in saying, oh, hello, dear. And when you're dealing with a patient, you tend to forget about their COVID status. They've got so many other sort of comorbidities that the COVID patient, the COVID status, if you like, really holds no weight. You're dealing with a person first and foremost. And I think that's been quite apparent in the last 2 weeks that I've been working there. But going back to
do you think the example is similar to Ramadan, where you might be doing one worship outside of Ramadan and it's like normal, but as soon as it comes to Ramadan, it's multiplied. Similarly, you're doing what you have to do as part of NHS on a normal day, and it is what it is. But then during the coronavirus period, the rewards and everything has increased because of the sacrifices as well. I would just like to say Assalamu alaikum to Sada Mariam Sadak, and then also Sister Shireen Sadak, and also to wa alaikum salam to Brother Zahid Khan as well. So we've got a whole family who's joined us there. And also one of my friends, Safraz Ghani, from the Caribbean islands, from Trinidad. And he said, mashallah, greetings from warm. And said, yep, absolutely.
So subhanAllah, it's very different to the weather we have at the moment. It's very grey at the moment, isn't it, Sheikh? I mean, we had lovely weather yesterday.
Yep.
Big change.
Yeah, very grey. Yeah.
So subhanAllah, thinking back to my original story, so where I was at, but I think the night before I was redeployed, I had trouble sleeping actually, Sheikh. So obviously there's a lot of anxiety going on in my mind, a lot of worry, and it was very interesting when I arrived there. We were all put into this tent, and there was a mixture.
Oh, wow, that does sound like a. You were put in a tent. Okay.
We were put into a tent, a training tent, where we receive our induction and our training on what would happen at the training. And
was there what kind of social distancing was in place in the tent and around the tent? Was there any significant social distancing? How was it done?
They had seats, and it was maybe 2 meters between each seat in the tent.
Right.
But yeah, when you go into the wards, and when we went into the wards, there's no social distancing whatsoever. So they tried to put in some social distancing for the training purposes, but in the actual hospital setting, there is no social distancing whatsoever.
So just want to add, because Umair has said this twice now, that it's Umair Khan using Zahid Khan's thing. So assalamu alaikum, Umair. Nice to see you. One question I had, Sheikh. So you work for the NHS as a special educational needs coordinator.
As a speech and language therapist,
Yeah. So when they're now deploying you to the front line, what are you doing there as a special speech therapist?
So this is where a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the, I think, frustration had come up from a lot of the staff members. So a lot of the speech therapists were given either the indication that we'd be working directly with speech and language therapy patients, so working directly with people who have difficulties with swallowing, difficulty with communication. Speech therapists who work in the hospital typically advise the doctors and the nursing staff about what foods people can eat, or they can't eat, or they can't swallow in particular. So if someone is having difficulties with a particular food, then the speech therapist would assess their swallow and give the recommendations to the medical team. Now, in this circumstance, we were given that indication that yes, this is what we could be doing, and we were given additional training for that as well, considering that we typically work with children. But at the moment, there has been no need for that. So that what they've said is you're going to be put into a more of a nursing sort of role, and you're helping out the nursing and the doctors with sort of day-to-day care of the patients. So that's where a lot of the sort of anxiety and a lot of the frustration of the staff members had originally lied, if you like. So yeah, so going back to that tent, Sheikh, the staff members in the tent had come from a range of backgrounds. So some of them had come from sort of health visiting backgrounds. They'd come from nursing backgrounds as well, but maybe they hadn't done nursing for maybe 10, 15 years. They hadn't worked in a hospital for maybe 10, 15 years or so. But the funny thing was, everyone there was feeling this same anxiety. And I was really thinking about it, and looking at why they were feeling this sort of this worry and this anxiety. It's because they're all going through this change, a change of where they're in a different set of circumstances that they were used to, from working from home, from being in your sort of relative sort of comfort zone, if you like, having a set routine, to going into a work environment where this routine had been completely blown away. And it really made me reflect about what some of our SEN students might be going through when it had come to this lockdown period, and what the coronavirus had meant for them, if you like. If a certain student had been coming to school and had their set routine, having breakfast club at 8 o'clock in the morning, for example, and that no longer exists because schools have closed, what that would mean for these students, Sheikh. And it was really interesting. As I was going through this, we were getting some emails from different parents, highlighting some of these anxieties actually, and certain students found it a bit more of a worrying period to go on Zoom to have their madrasah session, Sheikh, right? And I think we saw on the flip side, some of the more introverted students found that this sort of setting, that online setting, being a bit more liberating for them, that they felt a bit more comfortable to talk up. So there's a real dichotomy, if you like, of an experience between one, like student A and student B, if you like, and it's quite interesting, Sheikh, what this might mean for some of our students going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, just to pick up on that point, before I carry on, I think it's a good time to also remember the NHS and the brilliant work that they're doing. So Umair is saying that I commend the NHS. May Allah bless them. Ameen. Jazakallah for your du'as. And also may Allah save us from COVID-19. Once again, Umair, Jazakallah for that. And I think it might even be a good idea to have Umair online next week, maybe giving us suggestions about the special educational needs and what he feels should be done about this in madrasas and schools. So do ask your parents if you're willing to do that, Umair, inshallah. But moving on, so I've seen this very closely as well. And at the madrasa, so at Fatima Elizabeth, the way what we've done is we've kind of we transitioned in a different way, I think, from a lot of the other madrasas, in the sense that where we were a weekend madrasa. But we felt that because of the situations that we're all in, we should have more of a connection with our students over more than just the weekend during these situations. And what we are doing over the week, we have about approximately 140 lessons a week, and that includes all the small tajweed sessions, and also the Islamic studies sessions, and also the weekday sessions that we do. And what I've noted in a lot of the weekday sessions and Islamic study and all the other sessions as well, as I go into them, and I've been leading most of the weekday sessions, is that those students who are quite introverted, right? And there's a book by, I think Susan, her name is, and she talks about I think it's called Quiet. And it's about her perspective of life as an introvert. And also she talks about this world being a world that's been kind of planned or architectured for an extroverted public. So the introverted, people get left behind. And we feel that everywhere, even the way our classrooms are set. It's always like group work. And then there's a lot of introverted students who are like, you know what, let me just get on with my work on my own. I'll be happy to do that. And I used to feel like that myself when I was a student. So I'm trying to bring that to the fore. And I remember when I was a teacher at school, I used to always say to introvert students that there's so much going on in your mind. You've got to come up with ways to express yourself, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be verbal. It could be through writing down. And that's why it's important, again, when it comes to teaching in the classroom and teachers differentiating, it's very important that teachers are able to differentiate assessment as well. So when they're assessing students, you don't always want to have verbal assessment. So you don't want to always just ask questions. You might want to mix it up. And I think this is what I'm learning from the whole coronavirus situation and the whole online thing, that in the classroom it's all verbal, isn't it? And there's not as much. There might be a few, but there's not as much assessment methods for maybe assessing students who are very, very introverted. But when it came over to Zoom and any other platform, I've seen students who are very, very quiet in the classroom who are really shining now, especially when it comes, because when they're responding and when they're being assessed, a lot of the assessment is through the chat section. And then there, it's not about the voice, it's not about how you look, it's not about how you express yourself. It's about how you put your information, what's in your mind, through the keyboard onto the screen. And I think a lot of the introvert students, they are finding comfort in that. And they are able to respond, and we've seen a very different side to them, and it's beautiful. It's wonderful. And I think going back, inshallah, to Madrasah, we need to come up with ways where we give our introvert students full on assurance, maybe to have something like this, maybe teacher to have a laptop. Some of the introvert students, if they want to have some of their devices there, and they should be responding through their devices. That's just one suggestion, but we need to think deeply about our introverted students as well. Sorry, Sheikh, over to you.
No, I was just saying that one of these introverted students, which I know you're talking about, clinically, we would, as speech and language therapist, I would diagnose him as having selective mutism. That when they're in the home setting, they are able to speak quite freely to their mum, to their dad, to their parents, people at home, that they're quite comfortable. But when it comes to a particular setting, that is when you see this, that them going into their own shell, if you like, where they're not able to really speak out because of this social anxiety that they're having. So I think it's a way of replicating that home environment for them, where they feel that sense of safety and sense of security, and having that in the madrasa setting as well. But look, like I said, on the flip side of it, you have and what we had these concerns from parents as well, where in the madrasa setting they're absolutely fine. They're really, really comfortable reading sort of face to face. Yet when it comes to the Zoom setting, we're seeing that these anxieties are being multiplied. That they're feeling really, really uncomfortable sitting in front of a camera. And reading to a teacher in this sort of setting. So there's two ends to the spectrum, if you like, Sheikh.
That's very interesting.
And one of the things which we've sort of suggested as speech therapists is doing a lot of social stories. So social stories was a sort of approach developed for individuals who typically had autism, where you're sort of outlining a situation, a sort of scenario that person might be having difficulties in, and then explaining to that individual through the social story what might be happening. So, for example, you might have a person who might really, really struggle with going out to the shops, and what would happen in the shops. So when we go to the shops, we might buy something. Then you go to the shop and you might buy a coffee. Then you give over the money, and the social story would outline step by step what would happen in that social scenario. this could be something which might be a way forward for some of these students. So designing a social story that fits that social scenario, if you like.
Is that something similar to Lego therapy that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago?
It's slightly different. So Lego therapy is working specifically with groups, if you like, in a sort of scenario where you get the kids in a group and you assign certain roles for certain students. So in Lego therapy, you might have an architect who is the person giving instructions. Then you might have the builder who's actually carrying out those instructions. And you might have another person in that group who is like the supplier. So they're listening to instructions from the architect and giving the pieces to the builder. So you have certain roles in that Lego therapy. And again, that works to help people come out of their shells slightly because they're having a task to do in a sort of specific scenario, if you like. But when it comes to a social story, it's maybe looking at a scenario that's explaining it in very, very black and white terms where there's no ambiguity. And typically you might get sort of pictures that accompany it as well. So you have these cartoons that accompany these social scenarios and these social cartoons that really, really highlight and make it quite clear for an individual how to sort of react and respond in a certain situation.
There's a comment that's come up, Sheikh. Let's share that and see. So that's from Aisha Y. So Salam, I agree with Sheikh Hamid regarding finding ways to bring out the best from our introverted students, even though they may flourish through technology. Wouldn't that be a negative point? So can I just answer that first and give my feedback on that? So yes, I definitely agree with that, that sometimes overusing technology could be negative. But at the same time, I think if we step back and think about technology has always been around us in different shapes and forms. So even if you look at it, if you go back, say, I don't know, 10,000 years, humans traveled by foot without any technology. And then came the wheel, right? And then that wheel then transforms over millenniums, and then over centuries, and then we see it in the form of cars, we see it in the form of trains, we see it in the form of a bicycle, and it kind of helps us it makes our life easier. So that's what technology is there to make, I think, to make one's life easier. So same with when it comes to washing machine, we get used to these things, and every time there is I think when we're facing technology for the first time or there's something new, humans always have this hesitation. But once we get used to it, it becomes part of our everyday lives. So we're surrounded by technology today as well. So I think if there's good in technology, if it benefits us in certain ways, then I think it should be looked into. Albeit we should try not to become reliant on it as much or dependent upon it. But there's so many. I mean, I think we're way beyond that stage now. We're way too dependent on technology. That's human nature now. Also, the second point I think is linked, and also, Sheikh, you come into this as well. So Aisha is saying where they become reliant, through that communication method, and they aren't able to express their thoughts verbally. I mean, that is a good point, and I think that depends on the level of what level of introvert they are, what extreme they've gone into. So there may be some students who are extremely introverted, and that may be a problem in terms of their confidence. If technology can be used as a means to give them confidence or to boost their confidence, maybe then they can, inshallah, move forward from there. That's why there's many introverts. They wouldn't be able to lecture in front of an audience, but they'll be able to write. So it's about finding what they when they find themselves in their element, and how they can express themselves and maybe help them in that way. So I think it's one of those things. It is definitely about trialing different things with introverts. And one of those things that we found in our experience from COVID-19 scenario is Zoom and the whole concept of chat. And we can even simplify that. And instead of chat, when we're getting responses from students, we say, okay, we want half the students to give us verbal responses and half the students to give us responses via a sticky note. and they have the option to write their name or not, keep anonymous or write their name. That way, those students who are introverted, they get a chance to express themselves through the medium of writing, and those students who are extroverts, they can express themselves through the medium of verbally responding. But then what teachers can do at some point is to swap those roles around. So we then get extroverts writing down their response to the teacher, or their feedback, or their answer to the question, and then we try and push for introverts to respond verbally as well. But what I found, Sister Aisha, from my side, yes, sorry, yes.
I was going to, I can't get your point back, and then I'll elaborate on the technology in a second.
Yeah. So one thing that I've noticed is with some students that we have who were very introverted, right? Through these Zoom lessons that we're having, they've opened up in ways that are unbelievable. I mean, it's very, very like wonderful the way now we're getting to find out their personalities, their character, just through Zoom. And now when we go back to the classroom, I think our connection with those students is going to be very different. It's going to be much more fruitful from what I can fathom at the moment and what I've experienced. So that's my take on technology.
Just a point on technology. Interesting for non-verbal students, speech therapists might put in place a communication method, such as like using an iPad, for example, to help that student get their points and ideas across. Because if they don't have the physical capacity to actually speak, that technology might be a way forward for them to actually communicate. Thinking about Professor Stephen Hawking, for example, he used a very, very outdated voca machine. There's much more advanced voca machines out there, but he was particular in having that one that he used, which is why he never really changed it. And that was a way for him to get across his ideas through that voca machine. And this was an amazing, fantastic, brilliant mind, which enabled him to speak, if you like. So communication via technology has been there for a very, very long time. Just thinking back, actually, Sheikh, I think you recommended the book "The Reason Why I Jump." From the author, I can't remember him, but from a young Japanese boy, and he I think communicated via an alternative communication method as well.
The whole book was written using that alternative communication method, and we do recommend that book, "The Reason Why I Jump." And I think the film was supposed to be coming out soon as well. I don't know if it's come out yet, but do look out for that as well.
So Sheikh, I think we're coming up to the half-hour point. I think again the whole purpose of sort of this session was obviously me reflecting on sort of those anxieties which these were healthcare professionals, professionals who had worked in many different capacities within NHS, being at nursing roles, etc., and they were all feeling these sorts of anxieties, these sorts of worries, and again reflecting that on our student population as well, and where they were coming from when it comes to this sort of lockdown period, if you like. Has been any other questions or any other comments?
I'm just bringing up the full name of the book, which I think Sister Aisha has asked for. So I'm just I'll probably bring up the Amazon link as well if anyone wanted to, or if anyone was interested in buying it. It's not that expensive as well, so that's a good thing. So Sister Aisha, I'm bringing up the link for you here. That's going to be pasted both on YouTube and Facebook at the same time. So both whoever's joining us from whichever platform, you can have a look at that. And also I'll put up the name as well. So the book is called "The Reason I Jump," and it's One Boy's Voice from the Silence of Autism. And the name goes here as... I think my internet's slightly weak, so I'm going to try that again. Should be fine.
And I guess sort of some final thoughts, if you like, Sheikh, on.
So just putting it on the screen here.
So some final thoughts from me just on sort of this pandemic as well. one of the main reasons why I really want to sort of continue within sort of the sort of this healthcare setting, if you like. The verse always came to mind. So كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر, that you're the best of all people taken out for humanity. It was very interesting being sort of a minority there within that tent. I was perhaps the only Muslim man there within that setting. And it was very interesting. I was talking to a patient the other day, and she noticed I was a Muslim, and I think she might have COVID. I'm not too sure now. But she goes, no, I noticed you're Muslim. And she goes, it really doesn't matter, you know, what faith we are in this particular setting, because I know you're doing a fantastic job and you're helping us. And that was quite a unique moment. And she had her cross out there. But it was quite touching, actually, hearing that come from a patient, and sort of confirming or affirming sort of my intentions, like in being there in the first place to help some of these people. And I guess if anyone who can do something to help others in the community, you know, be that perhaps giving iftar to someone who might not have iftar, or helping someone who might be elderly in the community, it's a very, very good opportunity to earn some ajr and earn extra reward, particularly being in Ramadan as well, at this time, inshallah.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. This is the time for it, and you know, many groups were created on WhatsApp. You know, even here in Walthamstow, with various roads, finding out whether anyone needed any help or support with deliveries and things like that. So, alhamdulillah, yes, absolutely. And if we can help, this is the time. This is the time to get even more reward. And it's, on top of that, it's Ramadan as well. So. We don't think we'll have a Ramadan like this again. And I will hopefully not, inshallah, have a Ramadan like this in the sense of, you know, the virus, etc. But still, at the same time, for a believer, every situation is a positive situation. So the positive from this is the more we can do for people around us, learning from the quality of Prophet being rahmatul lil alameen, mercy for mankind, not just the believers, but everyone who falls under humanity. So I think that's incredibly important as well. A quick question has come up, which, yeah, here it is. I'll just put that up, and inshallah after this we can start wrapping up. In case of Aisha again, Sister Aisha, in case of selective mutism, I believe Sheikh Danyaal mentioned, does that manifest only in a school setting? Can't it also be in a workplace or elsewhere, maybe with family, which they don't see often? And then I'll do the second part of the question as well. How would you advise someone with this issue, or someone in your family who struggles with this?
Yes, that's a very good question. Yeah, students who grow up and have selective mutism, of course, they would end up having to go into a workplace and having to function in society as per normal, and it can be quite debilitating in some aspects. You know, if we live in this extrovert world, you know, to be able to function in this sort of way. Can it also be in a workplace, maybe with family, which they don't see often? Absolutely. You know, we see certain students with social anxiety really struggling when it comes to dealing with certain members that they don't know or they might not feel comfortable with as well. The next step of the question, Sheikh, was...
How would you advise someone with this issue, or someone in your family who struggles with this?
So typically we would advise them to go through some level of therapy, and it has to be very, very gradual. So, you know, let's say, especially at an earlier stage, if someone is working with someone who has selective mutism, it's a very, very graduated approach that has to take place. And typically a speech and language therapist would give that advice and would give a program into how someone would work with a student like this. Perhaps you could email us at some point, and we could perhaps give a bit more detailed information away from this that could be a bit more in depth in terms of advising someone with this issue, perhaps, inshallah.
Right, and everyone's situations and contexts will be different as well.
Will be different, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I think a lot of it also depends on families as well, on how they react. You know, are they making fun of them for being quiet all the time? Because that is an issue. That I remember, and I don't think I've spoken about this before. When I was a student in Darul Uloom, I was very quiet when it came to new people. To the extent that they would continuously highlight it and bring it up again and again and again. And I think I lost my confidence as a result of that. So I think education is key. Education is absolutely at the core. And coming from a family where with a Pakistani background, and when it comes to food time and eating, there's a lot of talking, useless talk that goes on. And I remember when I went to Pakistan as well, it's almost like an expectation for everyone to talk all the time, even if they don't have anything useful to say. They'll just say things that are useless. And I think it's important to also, in this case, look back at one of the qualities of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that he was tawilu samt, that he would spend a long amount of time in silence. So he would remain silent, and Sahaba would be sitting around him, and just sitting in silence. So I think that's key, that we understand this not always as a problem or something that needs to be fixed, but maybe there's something that we can also take from that. I think that's key, and then this whole concept of you have to talk, or and that this is the kind. It depends on what kind of culture, family, friends you're coming from, and how they view this and how they see this. And something like selective mutism, we need to talk about topics like this more and more, in the sense that some people, they have this, okay, but also at the same time, how much do we need to talk as well? And if someone does have it, how are we to react? If someone does have it and they don't talk much, do we look down upon them? So I think this is key, that this is when we look back at the life of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and say, no, he was tawil samt. He spent long amount of time, right, extremely long amount of time in silence and in reflection. And this is something I think missing in our extrovert world today, where it's hardly, we're just sitting doing nothing. We're either talking or we're in front of a screen, talking through clicking of the button. And I think I would agree with the Sister Aisha on that's where technology goes way too far, and where we need to cut back, definitely. So there's one last point. Let's have a look. Yeah, because I think it's a personal point that Sister Aisha is mentioning. So Sister Aisha is saying, yes, my daughter struggles with social settings, although very confident with people who she is familiar with. I don't think people around her understand, or even family, that she isn't just shy. Absolutely. And this is what we're talking about. And this is why it's important that we educate family. And that's the difficult thing, right? How do we educate our families about this? And going back again, for me, and when I look back at the life of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I'm always intrigued and interested in the way he tried to bring his family and people around him to Islam in general. Because for us, Islam as a whole was the way of life, and that would have included aspects like this. And that we find incidents where Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam actually called all the non-Muslim members of his family around a feast. So he would call them. So at the house of Khadija radiallahu anha, which used to be on the side of Safa and Marwa, on that side, and he invited them to a feast and began talking to them about Allah. We could do something similar, invite our family to a feast, or have a session where we say, look, we invited you, and this is something we want to talk about, and tell them stories about this, and tell them that, even because there's one thing that all the Muslims agree about, and that's the greatness of the character of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. So that's our focal uniting point. And it's on that we say, look, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was tawilu samt. He remained silent for a long time. So let's stop this idea of if you can speak in front of everyone, or if you're boisterous, or if you're loud, that means you're good, or you have a good career ahead of you, you have a good life ahead of you, whatever. We need to diminish that kind of idea and notion. And Sister Aisha is now mentioning, can't speak, Okay, can't speak, but rather it would just take us some time to adapt or feel comfortable. And yet, to be honest, I used to feel the same. I still feel the same sometimes. I still feel the same when there's a new, this is me personally, a new situation. I'd rather just sit, and it might take me weeks to actually open up in that situation. For instance,
I'm exactly the same as well.
for instance, in at our madrasah in Fatima Elizabeth, how I am there, I probably won't be like that somewhere else. Because I feel comfortable there, I feel at home, and we try and then recreate that for everyone else who comes to the office. And that's why you'll see, if you were to come to our office in Madrasah, it's open to all the students, and students can come in anytime. They come and sit down and talk to us, right? And they can just walk in. It's like an open door policy. They can walk in, sit next to us, and ask us any question about that. So that's that. So Ustadh Mariam is writing something. Let's get Ustadh Mariam's take. I believe the ones who don't say much out loud have a great deal of thoughts going on internally. Jazakallah for that, says Ustadh Mariam Sadak. Absolutely, absolutely. And even Stephen Hawking's a brilliant example. I mean, obviously he had other issues as well, but he was still able to change the world without having to verbally communicate like everyone else. And we've got to remember, and I can't remember hearing this either in a lecture or reading this. If we look at most of the prophets, they were introverts to some extent. Most prophets, they were to some extent introverts. I mean, even with Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this quality that one of the companions mentions, tawilu samt, that indicates that if we were to analyze that with today's eyes, we would say, yeah, there's some form of him being introvert in that sense. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So I think we've gone over time a bit. Jazakallah everyone for joining in. Jazakallah to all the questions that came in. Jazakallah to the Sadak family who came online as a family, mashallah. Jazakallah to Sheikh Safraz from Trinidad and Tobago. Jazakallah to Umair for making lots of dua for the NHS. Jazakallah for that and giving us that reminder. And Jazakallah to Sister Aisha for bringing up some very, very important points. And I hope you can maybe do something about this, in terms of your daughter, and maybe share your experience with us. Let us know what you did and how you did it. But at the same time, we've got to remember, if our intentions are correct, this is part of calling towards Islam. This is part of calling towards the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we need to keep on trying. So Jazakallah for that, Sister Aisha as well. The philosopher MMA is back from India. Can we watch Islamic movies or documentaries? Absolutely. Why not? I don't see why you can't do that. So go ahead, but do make sure that the content is right. But always, when you are watching Muslim Islamic films or documentaries or anything else, do remember that's going to be an interpretation. It's going to be an interpretation of the producers. Not everything is correct. Okay, just to talk about, for example, Ertugrul, I think most of it is, I think just the chronology is correct. 95% is all made up. Okay, but obviously some of the rituals and culture that they show is correct. But so it's important to understand that if we are watching these kind of things. Sister Aisha is saying, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Hamid and Sheikh Danyaal. Very important discussions that I have been following for the last few weeks. I really appreciate your efforts of awareness and SEN and linking to Islam. Absolutely. And we know that there's not many people listening to us, but even if we have a few, that's enough to make this ripple get bigger and bigger. And then I think it's Umair or either Zahid Khan saying, Imam Shafi'i didn't speak until all the people were listening. Oh, that's very interesting. Jazakallah for that. We could try that with our next session. Oh, on that point, coming back to Musa alayhi salam, right? As we've all heard the story, when he was young, when he was actually a baby, right? The Pharaoh had an inkling that maybe this is the child that will destroy my kingdom and my empire. So then someone mentioned to him that, look, put him to the test, okay? Put a burning hot coal in front of him, which looks nice and shiny and bright, and next to it, put some form of sweets. If he goes for the sweets, okay, then yes, he's very, very smart and very clever. He is someone who has the potential to destroy your kingdom. If he goes for the fire, that means no. And what happened was, the story is told as Musa alayhi salam actually went for the sweets. His hand was going towards there, and then Allah sent Jibreel alayhi salam to move it towards the coal, and then he straight away lifted the coal about to put it in his mouth, and it burnt his tongue.
Oh.
And since then, he's had he couldn't speak properly. He would always stutter, so he had the stuttering problem. So again, and then Musa alayhi salam, I think he is a prophet who's mentioned the most by name in the Quran. Okay, so that did not stop him from becoming great in the eyes of Allah, and that is true greatness. It's not greatness in the eyes of people, because people will always judge. They're always there. That's what the job of people is, to judge. But if we are great in the eyes of Allah, we don't need anyone else or anything else. So Musa alayhi salam, and then there's the famous Maulana Ilyas, who's the founder of the Tablighi Jamaat, which is worldwide in every country. He also has stuttering. Can you imagine the group, the movement that's all about talking and da'wah by speech? Their founder used to stutter. So it's interesting.
Interesting as well, Sheikh. I heard Dr. Zakir Naik, this great da'i, calling to Islam, had a stutter as well. So a lot of famous examples like that when it comes to stuttering.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting that, and this is one of the reasons why, if you look at the whole concept of teaching assistants, when Musa alayhi salam was told by Allah to speak to the Pharaoh, this is one of the points that Musa alayhi salam raised with Allah, that look, I cannot speak. And then that dua was sent down. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani. Right, wahlul, oh Allah, release this knot on my tongue. And then Allah also sent alongside that Harun alayhi salam as his assistant. Right, so this idea of SENCos and teaching assistants is very much found in the Quran, mashallah.
Mashallah, yeah.
Okay, so Jazakallah everyone once more. So Jazakallah to everyone who's joined us. Inshallah, we will see you at around similar time next weekend, inshallah. Anything else you want to add, Ustadh Danyaal?
No, I think we've covered most things, Sheikh. Jazakallah to everyone listening.
Jazakallah. Let's finish with the dua. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.